The Law of Peoples by John Rawls quotes, "The Law of Peoples by John Rawls extends his earlier theory of justice to the international sphere, proposing principles to govern the relations between different societies. Rawls outlines a framework for how liberal and non-liberal societies can coexist peacefully by adhering to shared values and norms, such as respect for human rights, the duty of non-intervention, and the recognition of equal status among peoples. By conceptualizing the society of peoples, Rawls aims to offer a realistic and utopian vision of international order that respects the diversity of cultures while maintaining fairness and stability. The book also includes The Idea of Public Reason Revisited, which elaborates on how societies can justify their actions through a form of public reasoning that is acceptable across different belief systems. Quote 1. Political philosophy is realistically utopian when it extends what are ordinarily thought to be the limits of practicable political possibility, and, in so doing, reconciles us to our political and social condition. John Rawls characterizes political philosophy as realistically utopian to highlight its role in pushing the boundaries of what is considered feasible politically and socially. This idea seeks to reconcile us with our current state by envisioning a more just and attainable political order, encouraging a broader view of what can be achieved within the framework of existing social laws and trends. Quote 2. A reasonable law of peoples must be acceptable to reasonable peoples who are thus diverse, and it must be fair between them and effective in shaping the larger schemes of their cooperation. This quote emphasizes the necessity for a law of peoples to be acceptable across diverse societies, ensuring fairness and effectiveness in their cooperative interactions. It underscores the challenge of crafting laws that not only respect, but harness the diversity of cultures and governmental forms to foster broad cooperation without sacrificing the individual identities and values of the peoples involved. Quote 3. The second condition for a liberal political conception of justice to be realistic is that its first principles and precepts be workable and applicable to ongoing political and social arrangements. Rawls argues for the importance of practical applicability in political philosophy, suggesting that the principles of justice must be not only ideologically sound, but also feasible for implementation in real-world socio-political structures. This ensures that the theoretical justice frameworks can indeed guide and improve the everyday functioning of societies. Quote 4. The principles of these conceptions of justice must also satisfy the criterion of reciprocity. This statement reflects on the need for principles of justice to be based on reciprocity, meaning they should be framed in such a way that all parties involved, recognizing each other as free and equal, can reasonably agree to them. This principle is foundational in ensuring that the terms of cooperation are not only fair, but also seen as fair by all who are affected by them. Quote 5. Liberal conceptions are also what we may call liberalisms of freedom. Their three principles guarantee the basic rights and liberties, assign them a special priority, and assure to all citizens sufficient all-purpose means so that their freedoms are not purely formal. Rawls defines liberal conceptions of justice as liberalisms of freedom, which prioritize individual rights and liberties while ensuring that citizens have the material means to utilize these rights effectively. This approach highlights the importance of supporting both the formal rights and the substantive capabilities that allow individuals to exercise their freedoms meaningfully. Quote 6. The idea of a reasonably just society of well-ordered peoples will not have an important place in a theory of international politics until such peoples exist and have learned to coordinate the actions of their governments in wider forms of political, economic, and social cooperation. This quote points out that the concept of a just society comprising well-ordered peoples remains theoretical until such societies actually exist and demonstrate the ability to work together across various domains of governance. It calls attention to the practical steps necessary to move from ideal theory to tangible, effective international relations grounded in justice and mutual cooperation. Quote 7. Liberal peoples have three basic features: a reasonably just constitutional democratic government that serves their fundamental interests, citizens united by what Mill called common sympathies, and finally, a moral nature. Rawls outlines the essential characteristics of liberal peoples, which include a government that is just and responsive to the needs of its citizens, a populace that shares common sympathies, and a collective moral nature. This combination ensures that such societies are guided by principles of fairness and justice, fostering a cooperative spirit both internally and in their interactions with other peoples. Quote 8. A people will honor these terms when assured that other peoples will do so as well. This quote captures a fundamental principle of reciprocity in international relations, according to Rawls. It suggests that a people's commitment to honor agreed terms of cooperation depends on the mutual assurance that other peoples will also adhere to these terms. This principle is crucial for maintaining international order and trust among nations. Quote 9. The principles of domestic justice are consistent with a qualified right to war. They do not of themselves establish that right. Here, Rawls differentiates between the principles of justice within a society and the justification of war. He clarifies that while domestic justice can accommodate the concept of war, it does not inherently justify the act of war. This distinction is important in understanding the limitations of domestic principles when applied to international conflicts. Quote 10. In working out the law of peoples, a government as the political organization of its people is not, as it were, the author of all of its own powers. This statement highlights a key aspect of Rawls' international theory, where the powers of a government, particularly concerning warfare, are not self-endowed, but must align with internationally accepted norms and laws. This challenges traditional notions of sovereignty and emphasizes a collective, rule-based international order. Quote 11. Liberal peoples do, however, have their fundamental interests as permitted by their conceptions of right and justice. Rawls explains that liberal peoples pursue their fundamental interests within the boundaries set by their own principles of justice and rights. This restraint is part of what distinguishes liberal peoples from other forms of government, which may pursue power without such moral constraints. Quote 12. Any hope we have of reaching a realistic utopia rests on there being reasonable liberal constitutional and decent regimes sufficiently established and effective to yield a viable society of peoples. This quote underscores the dependency of a peaceful and just global order on the existence and effectiveness of liberal and decent regimes. Rawls posits that such regimes are crucial for forming a stable international society, which he terms a realistic utopia, where peace and justice are sustainable across different peoples and nations. Quote 13. The original position with a veil of ignorance is a model of representation for liberal societies. This quote explains that the original position, a theoretical framework where representatives operate under a veil of ignorance about their specific personal details, aims to ensure that any principles of justice agreed upon are fair and unbiased. This model reflects an ideal scenario in which societal rules are created without the influence of individual or group interests, aiming for a fair and equitable society. Quote 14. This makes the use of the original position at the second level a model of representation in exactly the same way it is at the first. Here, Rawls extends the concept of the original position to the international level, arguing that just as the original position helps ensure fairness within a society, it can also do so among societies or peoples. This extension assumes that representatives of different peoples, operating under a veil of ignorance, can agree on fair terms of cooperation based on mutual respect and equality. Quote 15. It is, therefore, part of a people's being reasonable and rational that they are ready to offer to other peoples fair terms of political and social cooperation. This quote emphasizes that being reasonable and rational extends beyond internal governance to include how a people interact with other peoples. For Rawls, reasonable and rational peoples are those who propose fair terms of cooperation, genuinely believing that other peoples might accept them as well, thus fostering mutual respect and peaceful coexistence. Quote 16. Their equality doesn't mean, however, that inequalities of certain kinds are not agreed to in various cooperative institutions among peoples, such as the United Nations, ideally conceived. Rawls acknowledges that while peoples are considered equals, this does not preclude the existence of functional inequalities, such as those structures within international bodies like the United Nations. This is similar to the acceptance of social and economic inequalities under a liberal democracy, as long as they serve a functional purpose and are agreed upon by all parties involved. Quote 17. These fair terms are those that a people sincerely believes other equal peoples might accept also, and should they do so, a people will honor the terms it has proposed, even in those cases where that people might profit by violating them. Rawls outlines a principle of reciprocity and integrity in international relations, suggesting that a people should uphold the terms of cooperation they propose to others, even when they might stand to gain from breaching these terms. This commitment to fairness and mutual respect is crucial for maintaining stable and peaceful international relations. Quote 18. Peoples are free and independent, and their freedom and independence are to be respected by other peoples. This principle establishes that all peoples possess the right to autonomy and self-governance, and that these rights should be mutually respected by other peoples. This foundational aspect of international law underscores the respect for sovereignty and the non-imposition of one people's will upon another, fostering an international order based on mutual respect and equality. Quote 19. Peoples are to observe treaties and undertakings. This principle emphasizes the importance of reliability and trustworthiness in international relations. By adhering to agreements, peoples contribute to a stable global order where commitments are honored, and the predictability of actions leads to stronger and more constructive international relationships. Quote 20. Peoples have the right of self-defense, but no right to instigate war for reasons other than self-defense. This statement underscores the principle that while self-defense is a legitimate reason for warfare, aggression is not. This principle is crucial in preventing unjust wars and maintaining international peace and security. Quote 21. Peoples are to honor human rights. This principle highlights the universal respect for human rights as a core element of international law and relations. It mandates that all peoples, regardless of their internal politics or culture, uphold basic human rights, thereby promoting global standards of dignity and respect for all individuals. Quote 22. Peoples have a duty to assist other peoples living under unfavorable conditions that prevent their having a just or decent political and social regime. This principle extends the obligations of peoples beyond their borders, suggesting a responsibility to aid those living in unjust conditions. It emphasizes the role of international solidarity and support in achieving global justice and equity, urging more capable societies to help those less fortunate in establishing fair political and social systems. Quote 23. Peoples must have interests, otherwise they would be either inert and passive or likely to be swayed by unreasonable and sometimes blind passions and impulses. This statement emphasizes the necessity for peoples to possess reasonable interests that align with principles of fairness and equality. Such interests are vital for maintaining stable and peaceful international relationships, preventing peoples from being driven by irrational and potentially destructive behaviors. Quote 24. The interests which move peoples and which distinguish them from states are reasonable interests guided by and congruent with a fair equality and a due respect for all peoples. Here, Rawls clarifies that the interests motivating peoples are based on reasonableness, fairness, and respect for equality among all nations. This differentiation from state interests which may often pursue power or economic gain at the cost of others' welfare, highlights a moral foundation necessary for peaceful international relations. Quote 25. Stability for the right reasons describes a situation in which, over the course of time, citizens acquire a sense of justice that inclines them not only to accept, but to act upon the principles of justice. This principle discusses the concept of stability for the right reasons within a society, where people naturally develop a deep-seated sense of justice. This sense not only leads them to agree with just principles, but also drives them to actively uphold these principles in their actions, contributing to a stable and just society. Quote 26. The just society of liberal peoples would be stable for the right reasons, meaning that its stability is not a mere modus vivendi, but rests in part on an allegiance to the law of peoples itself. This quote projects the idea that a just society's stability among liberal peoples derives from their genuine commitment to the principles of the law of peoples, rather than being merely a temporary or superficial peace. This foundational commitment ensures a deeper, more lasting peace based on mutual respect and shared values. Quote 27. Liberal peoples are not inflamed by what Rousseau diagnosed as arrogant or wounded pride, or by lack of due self-respect. Their self-respect rests on the freedom and integrity of their citizens and the justice and decency of their domestic political and social institutions. Rawls emphasizes that liberal peoples, unlike aggressive states driven by pride or a desire for dominance, base their national pride and self-respect on the justice and integrity of their institutions and the freedoms afforded to their citizens. This respect for internal justice and decency prevents them from engaging in unjust wars or domination over others, fostering a stable international peace. Quote 28. What can be the basis for a society of peoples, given the reasonable and expected differences of peoples from one another, with their distinctive institutions and languages, religions and cultures, as well as their different histories, variously situated as they are in different regions and territories of the world, and experiencing different events? This quote raises the fundamental question of how a unified international framework, the law of peoples, can be developed given the vast diversity among peoples and nations. This diversity encompasses cultural, historical, geographical, and institutional differences that challenge the creation of a universally applicable set of principles and norms. Quote 29. The law of peoples is developed within political liberalism. This beginning point means that the law of peoples is an extension of a liberal conception of justice for a domestic regime to a society of peoples. Rawls emphasizes that the law of peoples stems from political liberalism and extends these principles from the national to the international arena. This approach seeks to adapt liberal justice principles, which are typically applied within states, to govern relations among diverse global populations, promoting a fair and equitable international order. Quote 30. The public reason of free and equal peoples is realized, or satisfied, whenever chief executives and legislators and other government officials, as well as candidates for public office, act from and follow the principles of the law of peoples, and explain to other peoples their reasons for pursuing or revising a people's foreign policy and affairs of state that involve other societies. This quote outlines the expectation that leaders and policymakers adhere to the principles of the law of peoples in their international dealings, justifying their actions in a manner that respects these principles. Such adherence supports a global order, where nations interact based on mutual respect and reasoned dialogue, contributing to international peace and stability. Quote 31. The ideal of the public reason of free and equal peoples is realized, or satisfied, whenever government officials act from and follow the principles of the law of peoples, and explain to other peoples their reasons for their actions. This principle sets a high standard for international relations, requiring that actions by one nation towards others be governed by reasoned principles that all can accept. It highlights the role of public reason in creating a stable and just international order, where actions are transparent and justifiable under agreed-upon legal and moral standards. Quote 32. Public reason is invoked by members of the Society of Peoples, and its principles are addressed to peoples as peoples. They are not expressed in terms of comprehensive doctrines of truth or of right, which may hold sway in this or that society, but in terms that can be shared by different peoples. This quote underscores the universal applicability of the principles of public reason, designed to transcend the specific doctrines of any single nation. By focusing on shared values and principles, Rawls argues for a form of international interaction that respects the diverse moral and cultural backgrounds of the world's peoples while promoting universally accepted standards of justice and cooperation. Quote 33. To tolerate means not only to refrain from exercising political sanctions, military, economic, or diplomatic, to make a people change its ways. To tolerate also means to recognize these non-liberal societies as equal participating members in good standing of the Society of Peoples, with certain rights and obligations, including the duty of civility, requiring that they offer other peoples public reasons appropriate to the Society of Peoples for their actions. This statement defines toleration in the context of international relations as not merely the absence of coercive actions against non-liberal societies, but also the active recognition of these societies as equals within the international community. This includes respecting their rights and expecting them to engage in the public discourse that governs interactions among peoples, adhering to the principles that facilitate peaceful and respectful international relations. Quote 34. Liberal peoples are to cooperate with and assist all peoples in good standing. Here, Rawls extends the duty of liberal societies beyond mere non-interference to active cooperation and assistance, reflecting a commitment to a more engaged and supportive international community. This approach emphasizes the responsibility of liberal societies to contribute positively to global governance, aiding other societies in maintaining or achieving just and decent systems of governance. Quote 35. Liberal peoples cannot say that decent peoples deny human rights, since such peoples recognize and protect these rights. This quote challenges the assumption that non-liberal societies necessarily violate human rights, highlighting that many societies, which Rawls terms decent, do uphold fundamental human rights. This recognition is crucial for fostering mutual respect and tolerance among diverse societies within the international system. Quote 36. Liberal peoples should not suppose that decent societies are unable to reform themselves in their own way. Rawls argues that liberal societies should respect the capacity of non-liberal societies to evolve independently. This respect for self-determination encourages positive internal reform and supports the stability of international relations by avoiding paternalistic or coercive behaviors that can lead to resentment and resistance from non-liberal societies. Quote 37. Most important is maintaining mutual respect among peoples. This principle underscores the importance of mutual respect in international relations, viewing it as essential for maintaining a peaceful and cooperative international order. Rawls argues that respect facilitates constructive interactions and supports the gradual reform of societies towards more liberal and just practices without causing bitterness or resentment that could lead to conflict. Quote 38. Liberal peoples must try to encourage decent peoples and not frustrate their vitality by coercively insisting that all societies be liberal. This quote emphasizes the importance of supporting the natural progress and development of decent societies without imposing liberal ideals through coercion. This approach advocates for fostering change through respect and support rather than force, suggesting that true liberal ideals can inspire transformation naturally over time when societies observe their benefits firsthand. Quote 39. Most important is maintaining mutual respect among peoples. Lapsing into contempt on the one side and bitterness and resentment on the other can only cause damage. This statement underlines the necessity of maintaining mutual respect in international relations, warning that without it, negative emotions such as contempt, bitterness, and resentment can lead to instability and conflict. It highlights the delicate balance required in diplomatic relations and the potential repercussions when this balance is disrupted. Quote 40. Our aim is to extend the law of peoples to decent societies and to show that they accept the same law of peoples that liberal societies do. Rawls articulates the goal of extending the principles of the law of peoples to include not only liberal societies, but also those that are decent, though not liberal. This extension aims to demonstrate that diverse types of societies can agree on a common set of principles governing international conduct, supporting a broad and inclusive international legal framework. Quote 41. A decent hierarchical society's conception of the person, as implied by the second criterion, does not require acceptance of the liberal idea that persons are citizens first and have equal basic rights as equal citizens. This quote clarifies that decent hierarchical societies may have different views on citizenship and rights compared to liberal societies. It acknowledges the legitimacy of varying concepts of personhood and societal roles, which do not necessarily conform to liberal definitions, but still respect fundamental human rights and social cooperation. Quote 42. There is no inconsistency. A people sincerely affirming a non-liberal idea of justice may still reasonably think its society should be treated equally in a reasonably just law of peoples. Here, Rawls addresses potential criticisms regarding the treatment of non-liberal societies within the framework of the law of peoples. He argues that it is consistent and reasonable for societies that do not adhere to liberal principles internally to still demand equal treatment under international law, emphasizing the principle of equality among nations regardless of their internal politics. Quote 43. The first two parts of the second criterion require that a decent hierarchical society's system of law be guided by what I have called a common good idea of justice. This quote underscores the foundational requirement for decent hierarchical societies to be guided by a common good idea of justice, ensuring that their laws and governance structures work towards the benefit of all members of society, not just a select few. This framework is essential to maintaining a fair and equitable society that respects the interests and rights of all its constituents. Quote 44. Although all persons in a decent hierarchical society are not regarded as free and equal citizens, nor as separate individuals deserving equal representation, they are seen as decent and rational, and as capable of moral learning as recognized in their society. This statement explains that while decent hierarchical societies may not offer the same level of individual freedoms or equality found in liberal democracies, they still regard their members as capable of moral reasoning and learning. This recognition supports a form of governance that, while different, respects the capacity of its people to engage with and uphold the society's values and laws. Quote 45. In political decisions, a decent consultation hierarchy allows an opportunity for different voices to be heard, not, to be sure, in a way allowed by democratic institutions, but appropriately in view of the religious and philosophical values of the society as expressed in its idea of the common good. This quote highlights the role of a decent consultation hierarchy in ensuring that diverse perspectives within a society are considered when making political decisions. While not democratic in the traditional sense, this system allows for a form of inclusivity that aligns with the society's core values and principles, ensuring that governance reflects the common good as defined by all segments of society. Quote 46. Dissent expresses a form of public protest and is permissible provided it stays within the basic framework of the common good idea of justice. Rawls points out that in a decent consultation hierarchy, dissent is allowed as long as it operates within the boundaries of what is considered just by the society's standards. This provision for dissent acknowledges the importance of allowing voices of opposition or concern to be expressed, which is crucial for the evolution and adaptation of the society's laws and policies in response to its members' needs and insights. Quote 47. A decent hierarchical society's conception of the person, as implied by the second criterion, does not require acceptance of the liberal idea that persons are citizens first and have equal basic rights as equal citizens. This explanation clarifies that in decent hierarchical societies, the concept of personhood and citizenship does not necessarily align with the liberal democratic ideal of equal rights for all individuals. Instead, personhood may be viewed through the lens of group membership and roles within those groups, reflecting a different but still respectful approach to individual and collective rights within the society's legal and moral framework. Quote 48. Human rights in the Law of Peoples, by contrast, express a special class of urgent rights, such as freedom from slavery and serfdom, liberty, but not equal liberty, of conscience, and security of ethnic groups from mass murder and genocide. This statement highlights the focus of the Law of Peoples on a subset of human rights deemed essential and urgent for maintaining basic human dignity and security. These rights are considered fundamental across various political systems, including both liberal and decent hierarchical societies, and are crucial for safeguarding the most vulnerable aspects of human welfare. Quote 49. Human rights are a class of rights that play a special role in a reasonable law of peoples. They restrict the justifying reasons for war and its conduct, and they specify limits to a regime's internal autonomy. This quote outlines the dual role of human rights within the framework of international law, serving both as a limitation on the reasons a state may justify going to war and as a boundary for the extent of governmental control over its people. These rights ensure that international and internal actions are constrained by standards that protect individual and group rights against extreme abuses. Quote 50. Human rights set a necessary, though not sufficient, standard for the decency of domestic political and social institutions. Here, Rawls clarifies that while the fulfillment of human rights is necessary for any society to be considered decent, it is not the only requirement. This distinction points to the complexity of political and social justice, where multiple factors beyond the protection of fundamental human rights are necessary to fully evaluate the decency and justice of a society's institutions. Quote 51. An outlaw state that violates these rights is to be condemned, and in grave cases may be subjected to forceful sanctions and even to intervention. This statement reflects the international responsibility to respond to violations of human rights, underscoring that severe breaches may warrant external interventions, including sanctions or military actions, to protect those rights. This position is based on a consensus among liberal and decent societies regarding the non-tolerability of such violations. Quote 52. Liberal and decent peoples have the right, under the Law of Peoples, not to tolerate outlaw states. Rawls asserts that societies adhering to the principles of the Law of Peoples are justified in not tolerating states that aggressively violate human rights. This stance is based on a collective agreement among these societies, forming a moral and political basis for addressing and curbing the behaviors of outlaw states to promote global stability and respect for human rights. Quote 53. Some think that any liberal law of peoples, particularly any social contract such law, should begin by first taking up the question of liberal cosmopolitan or global justice for all persons. This quote addresses the belief held by some that a liberal law of peoples should start with addressing global justice for all individuals, advocating for equal rights and liberties universally. This perspective suggests a cosmopolitan approach, where all persons are considered in a global original position, advocating for foundational rights across all borders. Quote 54. To proceed in this way, however, takes us back to where we were in Farber 7.2, since it amounts to saying that all persons are to have the equal liberal rights of citizens in a constitutional democracy. Rawls criticizes the approach of automatically applying the liberal democratic standard globally, noting that this method presumes all societies should aim to become liberal democracies. He argues that such a presumption undermines the validity of non-liberal societies that might still meet the criteria of decency and justice without adopting liberal democratic forms. Quote 55. The law of peoples proceeds from the international political world as we see it, and concerns what the foreign policy of a reasonably just liberal people should be. This statement outlines the practical and realistic foundation of the law of peoples, which starts from the current global political landscape. It focuses on defining a foreign policy that is just and reasonable, acknowledging the diversity of governmental forms worldwide without imposing a single liberal standard. Quote 56. A decent hierarchical society honors a reasonable and just law of peoples, even though it does not treat its own members reasonably or justly as free and equal citizens, since it lacks the liberal idea of citizenship. Here, Rawls clarifies that a decent hierarchical society can still respect international laws and norms of decency, even if it does not fully embrace the liberal concept of equal citizenship internally. This distinction is crucial for understanding how such societies can participate in a global framework of mutual respect and cooperation, despite internal differences in governance. Quote 57. Liberal societies may differ widely in many ways. For example, some are far more egalitarian than others. Yet these differences are tolerated in the society of liberal peoples. Might not the institutions of some kinds of hierarchical societies also be similarly tolerable? Rawls poses a rhetorical question to highlight the tolerance for diversity within the framework of liberal societies, and extends this notion to suggest that, similarly, some hierarchical societies might also be tolerable within an international community. This idea supports a broader inclusion in the international order, allowing for a variety of governance structures as long as they meet certain standards of decency. Quote 58. We have now concluded the second part of the ideal theory of the law of peoples, the extension of the law of peoples to decent hierarchical peoples. This quote marks the completion of a significant section of the law of peoples, where the principles previously established for liberal societies are extended to accommodate decent hierarchical societies. This expansion reflects an effort to create a more inclusive framework that acknowledges the legitimacy of different forms of governance while still upholding fundamental principles of justice and human rights. Quote 59. The principles of justice for the basic structure of a liberal democratic society are not, that is, fully general principles. They do not apply to all subjects, not to churches or universities, or even to the basic structures of all societies. Here, Rawls clarifies that the principles of justice as conceived in liberal democracies are not universally applicable to every societal institution or context. This distinction is crucial in recognizing the limits of liberal democratic principles and the need for a diverse approach when considering different societal structures, such as those found in decent hierarchical societies. Quote 60. The law of peoples is autonomous. The 8 principles of the law of peoples apply to well-ordered peoples regarded as free and equal. This statement underscores the autonomy of the law of peoples, emphasizing that its principles are designed specifically for societies that are considered well-ordered and treat their constituents as free and equal. This framework is distinct from domestic principles of justice and is tailored to regulate the interactions between sovereign societies. Quote 61. Should the law of peoples be reasonably complete, it would include reasonable political principles for all politically relevant subjects, for free and equal citizens and their governments, and for free and equal peoples. Rawls posits that a fully developed law of peoples would provide comprehensive guidelines for all political entities, ensuring that principles for just interaction are available for every relevant political actor, from individual citizens to entire societies. This universality is aimed at fostering a stable and just international order. Quote 62. We do conjecture, however, that if the content of reasonableness, decency, and rationality is laid out properly, the resulting principles and standards of right and justice will hang together and will be affirmed by us on due reflection. In this conclusion, Rawls expresses hope that well-articulated principles of reasonableness, decency, and rationality will form a coherent set of norms that, upon careful consideration, will be widely accepted and upheld. This conjecture is foundational to his vision of a just and peaceful international society, where diverse communities can coexist under a common framework of respect and mutual understanding. Quote 63. Non-ideal theory asks how this long-term goal might be achieved or worked toward, usually in gradual steps. It looks for policies and courses of action that are morally permissible and politically possible, as well as likely to be effective. This quote explains the role of non-ideal theory in political philosophy, which is to explore practical ways to progress toward an ideal set of conditions in international relations. It acknowledges the complexities of real-world politics and the need for policies that are both morally justifiable and practically feasible to bring about positive change. Quote 64. Well-ordered peoples, both liberal and decent, do not initiate war against one another. They go to war only when they sincerely and reasonably believe that their safety and security are seriously endangered by the expansionist policies of outlaw states. This statement underscores a fundamental principle of the Law of Peoples. Well-ordered societies engage in warfare only as a last resort, and only when their existence is threatened. This restraint is a key component of the international order envisioned by Rawls, promoting peace and stability among nations that adhere to the Law of Peoples. Quote 65. No state has a right to war in the pursuit of its rationale, as opposed to its reasonable interests. Rawls draws a clear distinction between rational and reasonable interests, arguing that only the latter, those which are just and fair, can justify a state's decision to go to war. This principle restricts the use of military force to defend the fundamental principles of justice and human rights, rather than for economic or strategic advantages. Quote 66. The Law of Peoples does, however, assign to all well-ordered peoples the right to war in self-defense. Here, Rawls affirms that self-defense is a legitimate reason for war under the Law of Peoples. This right is fundamental to the sovereignty and security of all well-ordered societies, ensuring that they can protect themselves from external threats while adhering to a shared set of ethical guidelines. Quote 67. Their long-run aim is to bring all societies eventually to honor the Law of Peoples and to become full members in good standing of the Society of Well-Ordered Peoples. This quote reveals the ultimate goal of well-ordered societies: to create a global order where all nations adhere to the Law of Peoples, promoting a world where human rights are universally respected and conflicts are resolved through lawful and peaceful means. This vision reflects a deep commitment to global justice and the rule of law. Quote 68. Following the above account of the aim of a just war, let us now take up the principles restricting the conduct of war. Jus in bello. This quote introduces the principles that should govern the conduct of war according to just war theory. It sets the stage for detailing the ethical constraints that well-ordered societies must adhere to during wartime, ensuring that their actions remain aligned with the broader goals of justice and peace. Quote 69. Well-ordered peoples do not wage war against each other, but only against non-well-ordered states whose expansionist aims threaten the security and free institutions of well-ordered regimes and bring about the war. This statement reinforces the premise that well-ordered societies, which subscribe to the Law of Peoples, engage in war only as a defensive measure against threats posed by non-well-ordered aggressive states. This principle is foundational in maintaining peace and stability among societies that respect international norms and justice. Quote 70. In the conduct of war, well-ordered peoples must carefully distinguish three groups: the outlaw state's leaders and officials, its soldiers, and its civilian population. Rawls emphasizes the necessity of distinguishing between different groups within an enemy state during wartime, highlighting the ethical requirement to differentiate between those responsible for the war and innocent civilians. This differentiation is crucial in ensuring that military actions are targeted and do not unjustly harm non-combatants. Quote 71. Well-ordered peoples must respect, so far as possible, the human rights of the members of the other side, both civilians and soldiers, for two reasons. This quote underlines the obligation of well-ordered societies to uphold the human rights of everyone, including enemy combatants and civilians, during conflicts. This respect for human rights not only adheres to international law, but also serves an educational purpose, demonstrating the values of justice and humanity to all involved. Quote 72. The way a war is fought, and the deeds done in ending it, live on in the historical memory of societies and may or may not set the stage for future war. Here, Rawls discusses the long-term impact of how wars are conducted, stressing that the actions taken and the manner in which wars are concluded can influence future relations and the likelihood of recurring conflicts. This principle serves as a reminder of the enduring consequences of wartime decisions on international relations and peacebuilding. Quote 73. In non-compliance theory, we have seen that the long-term goal of relatively well-ordered societies is somehow to bring the outlaw states into the society of well-ordered peoples. This quote outlines the primary objective of well-ordered societies in dealing with non-compliant states under non-ideal conditions. The goal is to integrate these outlaw states into a broader community of well-ordered societies, fostering a global order based on mutual respect and adherence to the law of peoples. Quote 74. Burdened societies, while they are not expansive or aggressive, lack the political and cultural traditions, the human capital and know-how, and, often, the material and technological resources needed to be well-ordered. Here, Rawls describes burdened societies as those that, despite not being inherently aggressive or expansionist, suffer from deficiencies in political and cultural infrastructure, education, and resources, which prevent them from achieving well-ordered status. This characterization highlights the challenges these societies face in participating fully and equitably in the international system. Quote 75. Well-ordered peoples have a duty to assist burdened societies. This statement asserts the responsibility of well-ordered societies to help those that are burdened overcome their structural disadvantages. The assistance is aimed not at enforcing a redistributive economic policy, but at enabling these societies to develop just and sustainable institutions. Quote 76. The levels of wealth and welfare among societies may vary, and presumably do so, but adjusting those levels is not the object of the duty of assistance. Rawls clarifies that the duty of assistance is not about equalizing wealth or welfare levels per se, but rather about empowering burdened societies to establish just institutions. This principle focuses on fostering capabilities and institutional frameworks that support justice and well-ordering rather than merely redistributing wealth. Quote 77. It is characteristic of liberal and decent peoples that they seek a world in which all peoples have a well-ordered regime. This quote underlines the foundational goal of liberal and decent societies within the framework of the Law of Peoples. These societies strive for a global order where every nation adheres to principles that promote well-ordering, peace, and cooperation. This commitment reflects a recognition that stable and just international relations are predicated on the internal order and decency of all societies. Quote 78. The Law of Peoples, on the other hand, holds that inequalities are not always unjust, and that when they are, it is because of their unjust effects on the basic structure of the society of peoples, and on relations among peoples and among their members. Rawls emphasizes that the Law of Peoples does not consider all inequalities among nations as inherently unjust. Instead, it views inequalities as problematic only when they negatively affect the foundational structures of international society and the interactions between different peoples. This perspective prioritizes structural fairness and functional relations over absolute economic equality. Quote 79. Once the duty of assistance is satisfied, and all peoples have a working liberal or decent government, there is again no reason to narrow the gap between the average wealth of different peoples. This statement clarifies that the objective of the duty of assistance is not to equalize wealth among societies, but to ensure that each society has the governance structures necessary to be considered well-ordered. Once this condition is met, further economic equalization is not a requirement under the Law of Peoples, highlighting a focus on institutional adequacy rather than financial parity. Quote 80. A society with few natural resources and little wealth can be well-ordered if its political traditions, law, and property and class structure, with their underlying religious and moral beliefs and culture, are such as to sustain a liberal or decent society. Here, Rawls argues that the wealth of a society or the abundance of its natural resources does not determine its ability to achieve a well-ordered status. Instead, the quality of a society's political and legal institutions, along with its cultural and moral foundations, are critical. This approach underscores the importance of systemic and cultural factors over economic ones in achieving justice and order. Quote 81. In developing the Law of Peoples, I said that liberal societies ask how they are to conduct themselves toward other societies from the point of view of their own political conceptions. This quote underscores the approach of liberal societies in forming their international policies based on their own principles of political justice. It highlights the importance of ensuring that these principles are critically examined to avoid ethnocentrism, ensuring that they are universally applicable and fair. Quote 82. The Law of Peoples does not require decent societies to abandon or modify their religious institutions and adopt liberal ones. This statement emphasizes the flexibility of the Law of Peoples in accommodating different societal structures, specifically respecting the religious and cultural institutions of decent societies that are not inherently liberal. This inclusivity is foundational to the universal applicability of the Law of Peoples, allowing diverse societies to coexist without the need for uniformity in their internal structures. Quote 83. Not all peoples can reasonably be required to be liberal. This follows, in fact, from the principle of toleration of a liberal law of peoples and its idea of public reason. Rawls clarifies that the Law of Peoples does not mandate liberalism as a condition for international respect and cooperation. This principle of toleration allows for a diversity of decent governmental systems, reflecting a broader understanding of justice that respects different cultural and political contexts. Quote 84. The Law of Peoples, as I have sketched it, simply extends these same ideas to the political society of well-ordered peoples. Here, Rawls concludes that the principles guiding individual liberal and decent societies are extended to the international arena through the Law of Peoples. This extension seeks to establish a collective understanding and framework for justice and cooperation on a global scale, emphasizing the role of public reason in achieving these ends. Quote 85. In Faber 1.1, I said that political philosophy is realistically utopian when it extends what are ordinarily thought of as the limits of practical political possibility. This quote reflects the aspiration of political philosophy to expand the boundaries of what is considered achievable in the political realm. It aims to create a vision of a realistic utopia where a just constitutional democratic society exists as a member of a just society of peoples. This concept not only challenges current limitations, but also serves to reconcile us with our social world by demonstrating the possibility of such a society. Quote 86. The fact of reasonable pluralism. A basic feature of liberal democracy is the fact of reasonable pluralism, the fact that a plurality of conflicting, reasonable, comprehensive doctrines, both religious and non-religious, or secular, is the normal result of the culture of its free institutions. This statement emphasizes that in liberal democracies, the existence of diverse and conflicting reasonable beliefs is a natural and expected outcome of free cultural and institutional processes. Recognizing this pluralism is crucial for understanding how societies can remain stable and cooperative despite deep-seated differences in belief systems. Quote 87. The fact of democratic unity and diversity. This is the fact that in a constitutional democratic society, political and social unity does not require that its citizens be unified by one comprehensive doctrine, religious or non-religious. Rawls points out that a democratic society does not need a single unifying belief system to maintain unity. Instead, unity can be achieved through the shared acceptance of democratic principles and institutions, which allow for a diversity of beliefs while fostering a common commitment to political and social norms. Quote 88. The fact of public reason. This is the fact that citizens in a pluralist, liberal democratic society realize that they cannot reach agreement or even approach mutual understanding on the basis of their irreconcilable comprehensive doctrines. This quote highlights the importance of public reason in liberal democracies, where citizens recognize that political consensus must be reached through appeals to common civic values rather than through individual ideological beliefs. This approach ensures that political decisions are made in a way that all citizens, regardless of their personal beliefs, can consider fair and justified. Quote 89. The fact of liberal democratic peace. This is the fact, discussed in Faber 5, that, ideally, well-ordered constitutional democratic societies do not go to war against one another, and they engage in war only in self-defense, or in an alliance defending other liberal or decent peoples. Rawls articulates a key observation that well-ordered democratic societies tend to maintain peace with each other and engage in military actions predominantly for defensive purposes. This behavioral pattern supports the broader goal of the Law of Peoples to create a stable and just international order. Quote 90. The idea of public reason, as I understand it, belongs to a conception of a well-ordered constitutional democratic society. This quote establishes that the concept of public reason is intrinsic to the framework of a well-ordered constitutional democracy. Public reason guides how citizens understand and engage in their political relationships, which are foundational to democracy itself, especially given the diversity of beliefs that characterize such societies. Quote 91. I propose that in public reason, comprehensive doctrines of truth or right be replaced by an idea of the politically reasonable addressed to citizens as citizens. Rawls suggests replacing comprehensive personal doctrines with the concept of the politically reasonable when addressing public and fundamental political issues. This shift emphasizes reasoning and decision-making that all citizens, regardless of personal beliefs, can accept as fair and rational within the public sphere. Quote 92. The idea of public reason specifies at the deepest level the basic moral and political values that are to determine a constitutional democratic government's relation to its citizens and their relation to one another. This quote highlights the foundational role of public reason in defining the core values that shape the interactions within a constitutional democracy. Public reason ensures that these interactions are governed by principles that all citizens, as equal participants, can accept, fostering a fair and equitable society. Quote 93. Central to the idea of public reason is that it neither criticizes nor attacks any comprehensive doctrine, religious or non-religious, except insofar as that doctrine is incompatible with the essentials of public reason and a democratic polity. This statement clarifies that public reason is not about undermining personal beliefs or doctrines, but ensuring that these beliefs align with the democratic principles essential for public governance. This approach maintains a balance between individual freedoms and the collective needs of a democratic society. Quote 94. Citizens realize that they cannot reach agreement or even approach mutual understanding on the basis of their irreconcilable comprehensive doctrines. Rawls reiterates that in a diverse society, agreement on fundamental political issues cannot be based solely on individual or group-specific beliefs. Instead, public reason must prevail, ensuring that decisions are made based on shared values that transcend individual differences. Quote 95. Public reason is public in three ways. As the reason of free and equal citizens, it is the reason of the public. Its subject is the public good concerning questions of fundamental political justice, and its nature and content are public, being expressed in public reasoning by a family of reasonable conceptions of political justice. This quote elaborates on the nature of public reason, emphasizing its role in representing the collective reasoning of citizens who are considered free and equal. It focuses on matters of public good and justice, articulated through a democratic process that invites participation from all sectors of society. Quote 96. The idea of public reason does not apply to all political discussions of fundamental questions, but only to discussions of those questions in what I refer to as the public political forum. Rawls specifies that public reason is particularly relevant to discussions within official public political forums, including judicial decisions, legislative debates, and public statements by government officials. This limitation underscores the role of public reason in guiding formal political discourse while allowing for broader private discussions to remain diverse and unconstrained by public reason's strictures. Quote 97. A citizen engages in public reason, then, when he or she deliberates within a framework of what he or she sincerely regards as the most reasonable political conception of justice, a conception that expresses political values that others, as free and equal citizens, might also reasonably be expected reasonably to endorse. This quote elaborates on the nature of public reason, defining it as the deliberation within a framework of justice that is universally reasonable and can be endorsed by all citizens, recognizing their freedom and equality. This underlines the democratic ideal that political decisions should be made based on reasons all citizens can accept, promoting fairness and mutual respect. Quote 98. The content of public reason is given by a family of political conceptions of justice, and not by a single one. Here, Rawls points out that public reason is not monolithic, but comprises a variety of political conceptions of justice, reflecting the diverse beliefs within a society. This diversity ensures that public reason remains inclusive and adaptable, accommodating various interpretations of what constitutes a fair and just society. Quote 99. Political liberalism, then, does not try to fix public reason once and for all in the form of one favored political conception of justice. This statement highlights the flexibility of political liberalism, which avoids dogmatically adhering to a single political conception of justice. Instead, it embraces a plurality of views that can evolve over time, ensuring that public reason can adapt to new societal challenges and insights. Quote 100. We must distinguish public reason from what is sometimes referred to as secular reason and secular values. Rawls clarifies that public reason is distinct from secular reason, which is often narrowly defined as non-religious. Public reason encompasses a broader set of values that are specifically political and relevant to the governance of a democratic society, rather than being merely non-religious or secular in the philosophical sense. Quote 101. Political values are not to be ordered by viewing them separately and detached from one another or from any definite context. This quote stresses that political values should not be considered in isolation, but rather in how they interact and relate within the context of societal institutions. This interconnected view helps ensure that public reason remains grounded in the practical realities of governing a diverse and dynamic society. Quote 102. How is it possible for those holding religious doctrines, some based on religious authority, to hold at the same time a reasonable political conception that supports a reasonable constitutional democratic regime? This quote raises a critical question about the compatibility of religious doctrines with the political ideals of a democratic society. It explores how deeply held religious beliefs can coexist with the commitment to democratic principles, emphasizing the need for religious adherents to also embrace democratic norms without seeing it merely as a temporary compromise. Quote 103. Referring to citizens holding religious doctrines as citizens of faith, we ask, How is it possible for citizens of faith to be wholehearted members of a democratic society who endorse society's intrinsic political ideals and values and do not simply acquiesce in the balance of political and social forces? This statement delves deeper into the challenges faced by religious citizens in a democracy. It questions how these citizens can fully integrate into a democratic society, genuinely supporting its core political values, rather than passively accepting them due to current power dynamics or as a mere modus vivendi. Quote 104. Nor again do we have stability for the right reasons in a democratic society where citizens accept as political, moral principles the substantive constitutional clauses that ensure religious, political, and civil liberties, when their allegiance to these constitutional principles is so limited that none is willing to see his or her religious or non-religious doctrine losing ground in influence and numbers. This quote points out a nuanced scenario where citizens outwardly accept democratic laws that protect liberties, but internally they are not truly committed to these principles if they perceive a threat to their own religious or ideological standings. This highlights a superficial allegiance to democracy, which can undermine true democratic stability if these citizens resist or disobey laws perceived as unfavorable. Quote 105. How is it possible, or is it, for those of faith, as well as the non-religious, secular, to endorse a constitutional regime even when their comprehensive doctrines may not prosper under it, and indeed may decline? Here, Rawls poses a poignant question about the real test of democratic commitment. Can individuals support a democratic system even when it may not favor or might even disadvantage their personal beliefs? This question challenges citizens to consider their dedication to democratic principles over personal or group benefits, emphasizing the importance of a broader commitment to democratic governance. Quote 106. These examples have in common is that society is divided into separate groups, each of which has its own fundamental interest, distinct from and opposed to the interests of the other groups, and for which it is prepared to resist or to violate legitimate democratic law. This quote examines the consequences when societal groups prioritize their specific interests over collective democratic values, prepared to challenge or break laws that don't align with their goals. This situation can lead to instability and undermines the principle of equal respect for all under a democratic system, calling for a re-evaluation of how deeply these groups are committed to the foundational ideals of democracy. Quote 107. Liberty of conscience must have an essential place in any constitutional democratic conception. They lay down the fundamental basis to be accepted by all citizens as fair and regulative of the rivalry between doctrines. This quote emphasizes the crucial role of liberty of conscience within a constitutional democracy. It asserts that such liberty forms the core foundation for fairness, regulating the interactions and potential conflicts between different religious and philosophical doctrines within a diverse society. Quote 108. Now we consider what I call the wide view of public political culture and discuss two aspects of it. Here, Rawls introduces the concept of the wide view of public political culture, which encompasses the engagement of comprehensive doctrines in public discourse, provided they eventually align with the democratic society's political values through public reasoning. This wide view allows for the inclusion of diverse perspectives in political discussions, enhancing democratic deliberation and consensus building. Quote 109. It is important that it be clear and established that the proviso is to be appropriately satisfied in good faith. This statement refers to the proviso requirement, which mandates that comprehensive doctrines presented in public discourse must eventually be supported by publicly acceptable reasons. This ensures that while diverse views can be aired, the conclusions drawn from them must be justified in a manner consistent with public reason and the democratic values of the society. Quote 110. The introduction into public political culture of religious and secular doctrines, provided the proviso is met, does not change the nature and content of justification in public reason itself. Rawls clarifies that while religious and secular comprehensive doctrines can be introduced in public discourse, they must ultimately adhere to the principles of public reason. This ensures that even when such doctrines are part of political discussions, the justifications for political decisions remain grounded in universally acceptable reasons. Quote 111. Citizens' mutual knowledge of one another's religious and non-religious doctrines expressed in the wide view of public political culture recognizes that the roots of democratic citizens' allegiance to their political conceptions lie in their respective comprehensive doctrines. This quote highlights how public acknowledgement and understanding of diverse comprehensive doctrines can strengthen democratic commitment. By recognizing and discussing these various doctrines openly, citizens can see how their personal beliefs align with public political values, enhancing their commitment to democracy for the right reasons and reinforcing the social fabric of the society. Quote 112. The family is part of the basic structure, since one of its main roles is to be the basis of the orderly production and reproduction of society and its culture from one generation to the next. Here, Rawls discusses the essential role of the family within the basic structure of society, emphasizing its critical function in nurturing and educating future generations. This role underscores the importance of family in maintaining societal stability and continuity, highlighting its relevance in political and social discussions. Quote 113. Accepting this, a central role of the family is to arrange in a reasonable and effective way the raising of and caring for children, ensuring their moral development and education into the wider culture. Rawls points out the central duty of the family to effectively raise and educate children, ensuring they develop the moral and cultural competencies necessary to participate constructively in society. This responsibility highlights the family's integral role in sustaining the social and moral fabric of the community. Quote 114. We believe, or conjecture, are other people's basic doctrines, religious or secular, and try to show them that, despite what they might think, they can still endorse a reasonable political conception that can provide a basis for public reasons. This quote emphasizes the role of conjecture in promoting understanding and acceptance among people with diverse religious and secular beliefs. By engaging in sincere and respectful dialogue, individuals can help others see how their beliefs align with a shared political conception, ultimately strengthening the foundation for public reasons and collective decision-making. Quote 115. Political society is always regarded as a scheme of social cooperation over time indefinitely. The idea of a future time when its affairs are to be concluded and society disbanded is foreign to the conception of political society. This statement clarifies the perpetual nature of political society, highlighting that it is envisioned as an ongoing and indefinite scheme of cooperation. This perspective rejects the notion of a finite endpoint for society, instead focusing on continuous collaboration and improvement. Quote 116. These requirements limit all arrangements of the basic structure, including efforts to achieve equality of opportunity. In this quote, Rawls discusses how the familial responsibilities inherently impose limitations on broader societal structures, including efforts to achieve equality of opportunity. This interaction between family obligations and societal goals reflects the complex interplay between personal roles and broader social justice objectives, highlighting the need for policies that accommodate both. Quote 117. Harmony and concord depend on the vitality of the public political culture and on citizens being devoted to and realizing the ideal of public reason. This quote emphasizes the significance of a vibrant public political culture and the dedication of citizens to the principles of public reason as essential for maintaining harmony and avoiding conflict within a society. It suggests that the commitment to these ideals is crucial for the overall stability and cohesion of democratic societies. Quote 118. Can democracy and comprehensive doctrines, religious or non-religious, be compatible? And if so, how? This pivotal question explores the possibility of reconciling democracy with various comprehensive doctrines, whether they are based on religious beliefs or secular ideologies. It frames the inquiry into whether these diverse belief systems can coexist within a democratic framework that respects and upholds the freedoms and rights of all citizens. Quote 119. Public reason is a political idea and belongs to the category of the political. This statement clarifies that public reason is fundamentally a political concept designed to guide deliberation and decision-making within the public sphere. It underscores that public reason should be employed to resolve political issues in a way that respects the principles of democracy and the rights of individuals without encroaching upon personal religious or moral beliefs. Quote 120. There is, or need be, no war between religion and democracy. Rawls asserts that there is no inherent conflict between religion and democratic governance, challenging the view that religious beliefs necessarily conflict with democratic principles. This suggests that through the framework of public reason, it is possible to harmonize religious diversity with democratic values, promoting a peaceful and inclusive society. Quote 121. Reasonable comprehensive doctrines do not reject the essentials of a constitutional democratic polity. This quote highlights that doctrines considered reasonable within the framework of political liberalism are those that do not undermine the fundamental principles of a democratic society. It suggests that while there may be a variety of beliefs and values within a society, those that support democratic principles are deemed reasonable and contribute positively to the public discourse. The Law of Peoples by John Rawls seeks to establish a foundation for a just and stable global community based on mutual respect and adherence to common principles. The key themes revolve around the extension of justice as fairness to international relations, focusing on the importance of human rights, the duty of assistance to burdened societies, and the rejection of aggressive war. Rawls emphasizes that by adopting a reasonable framework of cooperation, liberal and non-liberal societies can coexist in peace while respecting each other's differences, thereby achieving stability through shared values rather than coercion or domination.
Curious to dive into the mind of John Rawls? With StudyLab Pro's Book GPT, it's possible. Ask questions, explore themes, and discover the depths of the Law of Peoples in an entirely new way. Start your conversation now by clicking on our logo. And if you're hungry for more educational content, subscribe to our channel to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Want more than just videos? Click on our logo now to join us on our platform for multiple choice tests, in-depth content, and tools to help you ace your studies. Get started now.